Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schwab, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Welcome back to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schwab, and today we're closing out the year with something special. We're going to look back at some of our favorite conversations of 2025 with a focus on purpose. We had a chance this year to sit down with leaders who are shaping policy, transforming industries, and building movements. So you're going to hear from Patrick Kennedy of the Kennedy Forum, Craig Newmark of Craigslist, Steve Schwab of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, Jaymes Black of the Trevor Project, Katie Schubert of the Society for Women's Health Research, Fred Irwin of the National Women's History Museum, and Anna Palmer of Punchbowl. They shared amazing lessons on influence, from building trust across political divides to elevating unheard voices and even reshaping how institutions work. So this is our best of 2025 compilation. And to me, it made me think differently about leadership and persuasion and impact. And whether that's the courage of mental health advocates or the fight for inclusive health research, the values that guided Craig to build the anonymous Craigslist, or the authenticity that powers today's most effective change makers. These conversations remind us that influence isn't just about power, it's about purpose. So let's get into it. I know that you've been in your CEO role now for a little over a year. It's been a whirlwind of a year, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But just to start off, I want to ask you, you're leading the Trevor Project at a critical moment for LGBTQ plus youth. Who do you need to influence to advance this mission?
Who we have to influence spans from the young people that we serve to policymakers. And our mission depends on influencing a wide range of people. It also includes corporate partners and donors who fund and amplify our work. We also need to influence our base, and we need to influence those who aren't our core audience, those whose minds are made up, and they think that they know who we are, and those folks whose minds may not be made up, and they don't quite understand the challenge or the issue of LGBTQ plus youth suicide prevention. And in that regard, influence becomes a conversation about how we are alike, not how we're different. It becomes a conversation about our shared values, our shared experiences as humans, and then having and illustrating an authentic connection to those values. So the stakes are incredibly high, and we need to be in dialogue with anyone who has the power to make decisions that impact LGBTQ plus youth, especially in today's climate.
So for folks who are not familiar with who you are, how do you describe the Trevor Project? What do they need to know?
First of all, what I want to say is that the Trevor Project was the organization that I needed as a young queer kid. And rather than start off with the organization does this and that, I have to start with what the Trevor Project means to me and how much I could have used an organization like the Trevor Project when I was growing up in conservative South Texas, as you just mentioned in the intro. And then I connect that with the same way that I felt as a young queer person growing up in South Texas. Other youth who are, whether they're in South Texas or whether they're on the East Coast, wherever they are in this country, I'm sure that they can resonate with needing an organization like Trevor. And so the Trevor Project is important to thousands of LGBTQ plus youth all over the country. And we are the national suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ plus young people. And we've been doing this work for 27 years since our founding in the 90s.
You talk about the change that we need to see, and there's an opportunity in this moment of disruption. And one of the things we've learned from some of our other chief influencers is that using other people's stories and voices and faces is a really powerful way for an influencer to scale their impact. And your latest book, which came out last year, Profiles in Mental Health Courage, it does that so well. It's not focused on your own story, it's focused on the story of people from a variety of backgrounds dealing with mental health and addiction. And I wonder if you could just say something about that, because as a strategy for influence, finding a way to scale your message through others, that makes sort of a big difference. And so maybe you could just say a little bit something about that.
Yeah. So I have found clearly that in my life that personal connection. So when I got all of these 12 people in the Profiles of Mental Health Courage to sit down and agree to be interviewed and agree to tell it all. I mean, anybody who's read their stories knows that none of these people held back. They really put it all out there. And they did it for a spiritual reason. The spiritual reason they wanted to help others.
Yeah.
All of them were putting their own lives and reputations at risk. They were talking about things that otherwise are very shameful. And they did it because they don't want other people to have to suffer the indignities of a healthcare system that denied them these basic treatments that could have transformed their lives, opened up possibilities. And the fact that they're not stuck in how the world did them wrong, but they're trying to make the world right, to me is just
Yeah.
explosive. And so I think people respond to that. I mean, there's Miss Tony Dreyer. I mean, her life is, you just can't even begin to fathom the amount of trauma and hardship she has suffered in her life. And she's the most joyful person you could ever meet. And she spends her life helping other women who, like her, have both addiction and mental illness and who are caught up in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
She has all of these women come out of Rikers Island and she helps them at their new lives. And I guarantee, knowing her, as I do, that they all come to her and tell her the worst horror stories you could come up with.
Yeah.
And then she can tell her story. And I don't care who comes with what they think is the worst story in the world. When they hear hers, they're like humbled
Yeah.
by that amount of suffering. And because she can identify with that, she also shows them the
Mhm.
possibilities. And that's why recovery is so powerful. People who have been able to overcome that have you have the most influence by your actions rather than your words. And of course, in Washington, it's how do you make the spin? How do you make the words fit? And it's harder and more elusive to talk about how do you move people's action.
Yeah.
Um, so, it's got to be imbued with a spiritual dimension.
I wonder if you could tell us, how do you influence policymakers and the medical community to make sure that research doesn't exclude half of the population? I mean, that seems like a basic thing, and yet we're learning it's been a major issue.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like that's something that you would assume to be the case, right? That any medication that you take or any, treatment or trial that you would go through to better your health would have been tested in someone who looks like you, who is your age, your race, your ethnicity, et cetera, lives in an area like you. And that's just not true. So I think that's one thing where even I, before I got to the Society for Women's Health Research and before I was at the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, I thought that was the case. So I think all of the advocacy starts with education, really making it clear that for us, right, women were not included in clinical research until 1993. That pregnant and lactating populations were still fighting that battle. That was something that back in 2013, I was pregnant with my third child and had been asking my doctor and others about what I could take to treat a sinus infection. It was a really easy thing. It was not a chronic condition. And I got, three different answers about what I could and could not take. And so I asked my client, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, what the deal is. And they said, well, that population is excluded from clinical trials. So we just do the best that we can. And that really led to this conversation surrounding what are the policy solutions we could come to make sure that that population is included. And so we're really proud of that work. I'm really personally proud of that work. And it continues today to make sure that we're just thinking about it, right? It's just being considered, and where it is safe, we're able to do it. Where we can use modeling, we can. But that's sort of the last part of the population of women who have been excluded actively from clinical trials, and we're doing our best to make sure we can change that.
I do think that you are the kind of person that people look to for the next most important thing we need to focus in on as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, and as an influencer. So I want to kind of dig into that, because I think whether it's Craigslist, whether it's the current work that you're doing, you've had multiple different kinds of stakeholders to reach out to with your message and to get people to kind of think about things in a different way. So what are some of your strategies or tactics for influencing stakeholders that get them to pay attention?
I really am a nerd, seriously, with the obvious dysfunctions relating to social skills. All I know is being very passionate about all the time promoting stuff which really helps the country. And, well, basically, think about what your moral compass is.
Mm.
My moral compass was set by Mr. and Mrs. Levin in Sunday school way back in the late 50s, early 60s. They taught me to treat people like I want to be treated. That means provide good customer service. They taught me to know when enough is enough, which is why Craigslist is monetized minimally. And now and then your brother's keeper or your sister's keeper. Those are a lot of the things I think about influence in business and maybe beyond. For example, if you're treating people like you want to be treated, you do the best customer service you can. Sometimes that's really difficult when your site is mostly free, but you just plug away and do what you can. There's other advice I only learned in 2010 at the West Wing. Valerie Jarrett saw that we were getting hit by a really nasty dirty tricks operation, one which proved to be successful. And she told me that no good deed goes unpunished. And she helped me understand that someone who's basically honest, particularly a technology person who's very honest, will never be able to successfully deal with or confront someone who lies for a living. So those are some of the big lessons I've learned. They're fairly sparse, but the idea is that anyone doing good work needs to be prepared to be hit by very bad people because they have no conscience regarding dirty tricks campaigns, and those can do an enormous amount of damage.
What drew you to lead the National Women's History Museum, and how has that move shaped your understanding of influence?
Well, interestingly enough, I was recruited to consider this position. So, to be perfectly honest, I was not even thinking about the nonprofit leadership space. I really love the for-profit entrepreneurship space in general, and I always assumed, wrongly so, now I know so much more, but I always assumed that in order to make the biggest change, that was where I needed to be. I didn't understand the power, for example, of boards and the commitment that board members can have, the access to their experiences, like the level of learning. So, yeah, I don't, it was one of those things where I'm so excited to be here, but I certainly wasn't, it wasn't, I'd love to say it was strategic, but it was really more reactive.
Well, so much of life is like that, isn't it? It's like you kind of know which direction you're headed, but it's impossible to know what opportunities are going to arise. And I love that you shared that, because sometimes people see someone successful at the helm of an organization like that, and they assume that, you were 14 years old and you said that was your dream job, but that's not exactly how it worked. What was your dream job when you were younger?
So the common thread in everything I've ever done has been this desire to empower women. And I didn't know those words when I was a kid, right? But it just
even as a kid, it started very early on to kind of tick me off that women had never been this, or women weren't recognized as that, or that it took until, however long for women to get access to their own credit cards or sign up. So no matter where I was, and actually I started my career at 22 in management consulting. And so even then I was like, why aren't there more women partners? Like, let's organize. So I think my dream job, honestly, I always wanted to be an executive CEO, always wanted to lead something. I assumed it would be by building something myself, which I did.
You did.
But what I never understood or had really appreciated was the value that can come with moving into something that is well established, and kind of the brand value, the platform that you don't have to build from scratch. If you're willing to recreate something, meaning like redesign a strategy and come in and do all the hard work. So I always saw myself leading something, just not in the nonprofit sector for some weird reason. Maybe because I grew up in DC and it felt like that's what every woman was doing.
Yeah.
Awful thing to say, but like that's kind of what it looked like to me as a kid.
When I think about the transformative work you've done, we're mostly talking today about the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, but you've done this with other organizations. You're the rocket fuel. I mean, you really figure out a way to get all the right people together to build that coalition. So I want to ask you about that because, you've testified before Congress. You've recruited huge celebrities like Tom Hanks and Savannah Guthrie to join your movement. You've raised millions upon millions of dollars from major corporations and foundations. But then you also speak directly to veterans and to military families. How do you tailor your style of influence to these different audiences?
Yeah. So I believe one of the most important attributes in a leader is authenticity. And so authenticity allows me as a leader to transcend the professional side of my work and the personal side of my work. And I don't think that you can be a successful, passionate, cause-based leader, a movement-based leader, without being comfortable with talking about who you are as an individual, what lights you on fire, what's your rocket fuel, as you rightly said, and also be honest and scientific and deliberative and strategic in the ways that you're a professional leader. In other words, how do you build a structure? How do you translate that passion and that drive and that interest and that heart into a mission that people are going to get behind, companies are going to invest in, that have milestones and measurements. So I think it's a blended approach. And that's why, for folks who follow me online, whether it's on LinkedIn, which is really the sort of the main outlet where I spend a lot of my time, but even on Instagram or Facebook, I'm really comfortable talking about my family and how much I love my 15 nieces and nephews and my 6 brothers and my mom and dad, and all of that experience growing up and the love that surrounded me is what inspired my mission-based orientation as a leader and a professional. And so I don't talk about where I came from in a way that's sort of leveraging something towards an end, right? Or using my upbringing or my family or these beautiful kids that are my nieces and nephews as an asset to get somewhere. I talk about them because they truly inspire me to do the kind of work that I do. They're the rocket fuel that enables me to keep the pace that I'm on because I don't have kids of my own. My family is my backbone, and they've helped inform the kinds of things that I want to do in my life. And they help me be that authentic leader, that empathetic leader who can talk openly with my team and with my community about the way that I'm feeling. There's a lot of change happening in our country right now, Anthony. And some people are really excited about it. And some people are really nervous about it. Some people are really anxious about it. And in a moment like this, being authentic and acknowledging that sort of elephant in the room, or in donkey, in case you're talking about a Democrat or a Republican, gives people comfort. It lets them know that you're a human being. It humanizes you as a leader and individual. And, emotional intelligence and empathy is really a strength, I think, in leadership and cause-based work. And I think if you're going to call someone a chief influencer, and I'm privileged and honored that you consider me one, empathy and emotional intelligence and authenticity, those got to be necessary ingredients to be truly an influencer, to bring people together, to find more about what we agree on and than what we disagree on, and move people towards a goal.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I want to talk about influencing Congress. You're obviously a foremost expert on this topic, from letters to the editor, letters to Congress. Now, members of Congress are doing interviews with TikTok influencers. The tools of influence have changed a lot over the last couple decades. What still works and what surprises you about the things that work today?
And listen, I think, and a lot of other people spend a lot more to have their time, either as consultants or in the private sector, kind of developing strategies. I covered it for a long time. And we certainly, I think, are a piece of that puzzle when it comes to making sure that the right people are seeing the messages in terms of our advertising. But I think, as you say, like a lot of the things about getting to members of Congress, understanding the economic impact, who are the constituencies, mapping those out, remain really, really important. And I do think members themselves are trying to find different ways, whether it's direct camera, Instagram lives, or it's on, Twitter or other places. They want to be kind of talking and receiving information from their constituents as well. So I think it's not there's one silver bullet. There's one new way of doing it that, all of a sudden is going to work for a different campaign. But oftentimes it's putting together a really kind of kind of platform as well as messaging strategy that's going to work in Washington as well as back in their districts or in their states.
Yeah, and there's some things I've just heard anecdotally, or like, of course, a post on social media can sometimes really break through and get the notice of a member's office, their team, but at the same time, they may still get the print local small newspaper with a really low subscription and notice that letter to the editor that was submitted, which, may not ever even end up online and may not reach that many people. So I think that reinforces what you're saying, but there's not one silver bullet. It's really looking at this whole kind of tapestry of ways that we can reach folks and influence them.
Absolutely.
I want to talk maybe a little bit more about your perspective on influence, because we've been talking a lot about Punchbowl. I mean, you started your journalism career literally writing for a newsletter that was called Influence. Yeah. And I wonder if you could talk, looking back, how has your understanding of influence evolved from reporting on it to shaping it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that we're in a really different world than we once were, right? And in terms of, just as we were just talking about, formats of people, I think big companies can be really influential, but also third parties. There's a lot of new groups that are popping up, coalitions that have changed. The members of Congress, how they're influenced, I think, has changed a lot from social media. And so I think where it used to be maybe, what you would consider a power broker was, the few and the people that were at really big companies or at, some of the kind of party, establishment folks. Now we're really seeing a much more, I think, fragmented system of influence, right? And so that, how people can exercise that has changed a lot. I mean, you've seen that even and it's been talked about a ton, but we saw that with the presidential election, the idea that, candidates and President Trump were going on podcasts, right? Like Those kinds of things and the influential, it's no longer just talk radio, which was the 90s, the 2000s. Now you have podcasts that have extreme relevance and importance. And so I think meeting the moment is really important. And I do think, for the betterment of democracy, having more people that can be influential is a good thing.
I just want to ask you how your understanding of influence has, evolved as you reflect on your early career in tech to your current role leading a national movement. What does it mean to you today to be a chief influencer?
Well, I'm not making as many mistakes as I did when I was younger. So I as a young leader, I think that's how it's evolved. But what it means to me today to be a chief influencer is to understand that influencing people is not only about achieving my objective. Influencing people is not about being a bull in a china shop. It's a delicate dance, and it is a method of connecting what resonates with other folks and what they're looking for, and how your objective connects with what they need. So it's not just a sort of this let's get it done and I'm going to influence you by any means. It really is about understanding what makes the person tick. What is it that your objective that you're trying to achieve, how does that objective connect to what they need intrinsically? How do you connect those two things? And so that means that you can't go in and just believe that you can influence people and it's just going to happen like that. You have to understand your audience. You have to understand what drives them. And you have to be patient and be willing to understand that if you really, truly want to achieve an objective or a mission, that you have to understand that people who you're influencing and what drives and sort of makes those folks tick, the people that you are trying to influence. So I would say that I'm much more intentional about it today. It is a part of my decision-making process of how do I need to influence and who do I need to influence, versus just sort of throwing a wide net and hoping that I influence someone, which is what I was doing early in my career.
Well, speaking of influencers, you have quite a LinkedIn following, Mr. Schwab. You are what I would call a power user. I mean, you post a lot. You do a great job. You follow the best practices we talk about because you're tagging people, you're using photos, you're telling great stories. And I know it's really you behind the curtain. This is not, something that you just watch somebody else do for you. You are intimately involved. You are commenting. What do you say to another CEO who says, Steve, I don't have time for LinkedIn?
I say to that CEO, take a look at my calendar, which, I think today is this interview is my 7th meeting of the day. And I'll challenge any CEO, and we all got different levels of responsibilities. My organization may be smaller than some and bigger than others. There's always time to do what I believe is a responsibility as a leader, and that's to communicate to my stakeholders that I'm actually doing what I need to do to build my movement, to thank my stakeholders and my partners, to call people out when they should be called out, and to be authentic in identifying my leadership qualities and my leadership profile and the activities that I'm doing in my daily life to do this work. And so my LinkedIn profile is an opportunity for me to feature great stories of the work that's being done behind the scenes by my incredibly dedicated partners. Listen, there is a difference, and many of our partners have said this about EDF. We truly build authentic partnerships, which means we don't just take money from a company. Today we were meeting with Leidos, a huge company in this nation. If you walk through any airport security lane, you go through the big Leidos security markers. They also do a lot of mental health work for military families, and we're going to pilot a big mental health program for 50 families to figure out how we can bring more and better healthcare, mental health care to military and veteran caregivers. And Leidos is a big supporter of ours, but you see that support is not leading to me just slapping their brand on a LinkedIn post. Instead, I'm able to tell a story about how Leidos is making a difference in the course and the life of the people that we serve. And that serves as an example on LinkedIn, one, for the kind of style of leader I am and the kind of partnerships that we build, but also the kinds of companies like Leidos and Lockheed Martin and USA and Hilton, the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation, a transformative philanthropic organization based on the legacy of Bob Hope, led by Linda Hope and Tony Montaldo and Bob and Dolores Hope. Bob told stories and entertained troops in all corners of this world. And I'm able to talk about the legacy that he built and how it's being translated now today by his daughter and this board into transformative philanthropic investments in organizations like mine, so that we can maybe feel nostalgic like we did at the times when Bob Hope was alive. So LinkedIn, I'll tell you a quick story, Anthony. And these are the sort of the informal ways that I use LinkedIn. I certainly post about the meetings that I'm in and the conferences that I go to. But last fall, I saw catalytic philanthropic leader Michael Bloomberg make a historic investment in HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And this, by the way, is a great lesson on how you use LinkedIn to appeal to audiences and to segments that aren't maybe necessarily totally aligned with your mission-based work. And this is how I use LinkedIn a lot, is I lift up and think about, I live in the world of philanthropy, and as much as I do military and veteran caregivers and healthcare, and when I see a big philanthropist like Mike Bloomberg make a catalytic investment, I share it on my LinkedIn and I tag him and his team and say, look at what this great philanthropist is doing. And I got engagement from Mike Bloomberg and from his CEO and from the team. And all of a sudden, one of the biggest foundations in America is starting to look at what we do and how we impact lives. And now we're beginning conversations about how we might work together. And that was through challenging myself, as I do every day, to look on LinkedIn when I'm on an airplane or when I'm laying in bed at night before I fall asleep, or I'm in an Uber between engagements, and looking for opportunities for me to celebrate what my partners are doing, whether it's Lockheed making investments in disasters, or USAA investing in emergency responses, or Reach Resilience and Endeavors doing transformational work all across this country. Folks are surprised when you take a moment and thank them, because we don't do enough of that in this country. But it's just who I am. It's my authentic self. And it's okay to bring that authenticity, that personality to LinkedIn, because I think a lot of people recognize that I do that a little differently than others. And it's worked. It really has.
I want to talk a little bit about social media, if we can switch gears,
Sure.
because I had the opportunity to moderate a panel recently at the National Health Council's Health Leadership Conference. And you were on that panel alongside Chuck Henderson from the American Diabetes Association and Steve Taylor from the Arthritis Foundation, 3 incredible chief influencers, each of who has embraced that role and leveraged their personal brand on social media, such as LinkedIn, to support their business goals and their professional aims. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your approach to using social media as a leader.
Yeah. Well, and this was something that also took a little bit. And I will say, Anthony, your talk on how to use LinkedIn and showing and sharing how others are using it was super, super helpful, because LinkedIn in particular was intimidating to me. I wasn't sure how to use it. I had it. I didn't really do a lot on it. I was much more of like Facebook was the really big thing when I was my kids were young, and so it was like a place to share photos of my babies and I don't know, make weird updates about what I was doing that day or whatever. And then was really using Instagram similarly to interact with folks. But as I came over to the society, realizing that personal brand, particularly as a CEO, was really important, and being recognized as a thought leader or an expert to go to, that people are watching these spaces. And so I had taken sort of a challenge from the National Health Council meeting 2 years ago to see if I could really be more intentional with my LinkedIn and build connections in women's health, um, get to a broader audience, and also just engage both staff and, external sources in women's health. So I did that. In fact, I think I put it into my goals for the year, for like my professional
Oh, that's
development
great.
goals, was to do better at LinkedIn. I would have to think about what those metrics were, but I would say being invited to sit on that panel was probably really good, because and as I said, be careful what you wish for, because
Yeah.
now people are asking what you do. But I think sort of a combination of like, how are you recognizing your team? A lot of sort of tagging people who've worked really hard on something so that they get recognized for it as they're building their own brands, and their own expertise. That's really important. But I think for me on the advocacy side, particularly in the last year, we've had a lot of momentum at the federal level, as you mentioned, with women's health research and funding, and it's now become a national conversation. We're reaching people through LinkedIn that we would never have been able to either reach or engage with otherwise. And so
Yeah.
we've been really intentional in thinking about the posts that we're putting up, how we're engaging there, and showing up authentically. For me personally, like, I was a little nervous because I thought of social media as something that you use for personal use, but I saw Chuck using it that way, and Steve, and even like Leah Howard at the National Psoriasis Foundation will often post about her children, or something exciting that's happening in her personal life. And so I started to do a little bit of that. And then I had a really what I thought was a crazy week. I was in LA and I was meeting really famous people and speaking to them about women's health. And that was really cool and exciting. And I came back to DC and we were doing big policy meetings. And so I was like, I'm going to make a video about this week. And I didn't know how to do that on LinkedIn, but I did know how to do it on Instagram. So I made it on Instagram and then I just cross posted it on LinkedIn. And that video got a lot of views and engagement, and people were really excited to see it.
Yeah.
And so I have started to just do a little bit more on the video content side and really talk about what it is that we're doing. It just goes a lot further than where our, channels might have gone otherwise.
You said that one of your influence superpowers comes from your mom. What did she teach you?
Well, so let me just set the stage. My parents were both immigrants to the United States, and my dad was an entrepreneur, and he worked a lot. He had French restaurants in the DC area, and he worked, Friday night, Saturday night were his busiest days. And my mom also worked full time at the French embassy. And so we had a routine, which was that Friday night we would go, she'd be done with work and she'd take us to the grocery store. And as a reward for going to the grocery store, she'd then take us to McDonald's for dinner, which was a big deal when your dad is like a French chef. So anyways, we would go and sit down at McDonald's, like in the booth. And every Friday night, my mom would say, "Do you know what happened this week?" And I'd be like, "No." And I'll never forget, like the one example I can give you was, it was 1980. I was 6 years old. And she goes, "The Shah of Iran died this week." And I was like, "Who's the Shah? And like, what's the big deal?" And what my mom taught me there that has stayed with me my entire life was how to make any story accessible, right? There's nothing worse. I remember when I was in business school and I'd get so annoyed with the guys in my class who were like, "I'm going to go to Wall Street and work in finance." And I'd be like, "You mean finance?"
Yeah.
It's the same nonsense, right? Like, I remember my mom saying to me, like, "Okay, Fred, the Shah of Iran, think of it like the cat in French, the Shah, and he just died, and he made a big difference because he tried to modernize Iran, and a lot of people got mad because they thought he was too close to the United States, and and so he was exiled and he died in a whole different country, and like she made it so real and simple, and I was 6, right? But I now do that all the time. When somebody, a historian or a scholar or somebody's talking to me about somebody, I'm like, "Okay, so explain it to me, but give it to me like," usually they just explain it to me. And then what I do is I'm like, "So this is what I heard." And I retell the story because I love telling stories. I love being like, I bet you've never heard about, Maria Tallchief, who's on a U.S. quarter. Do you know that that woman was the first Native American woman to perform as the prima ballerina for America on the stage as Native American? Like, and she, or like all this stuff. But I don't know. I'm not going to remember the facts and the facts and the facts. And that's okay, right? But I think somebody might hear that story and go, the first American prima ballerina was Native American? That's amazing, So anyway, so that's a superpower. Like, just keep it simple, right?
I just want to ask you about, as we close, is your book, The Hill to Die On. It became a New York Times bestseller. And I just love the quote, The Daily Show's Trevor Noah called it like turning Congress into a Game of Thrones book. So it shows that very riveting read. So as a storyteller of power, politics, and people, what final chapter or takeaway would you want our audience to remember about how influence really works in Washington?
Yeah, it's not a bunch of old guys smoking cigars in the bar like it maybe once was or was caricatured as. I mean, I think influence has the ability to kind of promulgate, whether it's in media, whether it's in associations, whether it's in companies or third party groups, in a way that, kind of is the coin of the realm oftentimes, especially in Washington. And so there's more opportunity to kind of influence. I think as we think about this fragmented media, kind of ecosystem we've been talking so much about, but having trust, authenticity, a message that really resonates are going to be three key things in order to actually keep that influence and try to grow it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this special Best of 2025 episode of Chief Influencer and for being part of our community and listening in. We really appreciate it. And as we wrap up this year with a focus on gratitude, I'm just struck by how consistently our guests come back to the same core truths. Influence is built on authenticity. It grows through relationships and it expands when we use our platforms to lift others. I hope these moments inspired you the way they inspired the rest of us on the team. If they did, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, share this episode with someone who could use a little influence in their corner. And thanks again for being part of this community and for your incredible year of conversations. We can't wait to bring you even more insight, stories, and standout voices next year. And I want to thank the whole team at Social Driver, the whole team at the George Washington University College of Professional Studies, and our producer, Amanda, for everything that they all do to make this community possible. Happy holidays. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.